Inside of Westminster Abbey, at the heart of the historic religious building, is the tomb of King Henry VIII's fourth wife, a woman who is often forgotten throughout English history, but she was a queen. Anne of Cleves is considered the lucky one of Henry VIII's 6 wives, as she was divorced and then managed to live a life afterwards where she didn't lose her head, but in fact actually became wealthy and lived a life of opulence. Anne of Cleves was even referred to as the king's sister, and she and the notorious Tudor King actually got on very well. She was the only one of the 6 wives buried inside of Westminster Abbey, close to where her father-in-law and mother-in-law are interred, inside of the Henry VII Lady Chapel. Also near to her tomb is the tomb of her stepdaughter Elizabeth I, but Anne of Cleves is interred in her own vault and her own tomb, and this is very hard to spot but can be found. In this video, we look at what would be inside of her royal vault and consider how actually this small tomb could have perfectly preserved her remains 500 years after her death. And to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Anne of Cleves was born in 1515 in the German Duchy of Cleves, part of the Holy Roman Empire. Her family was Protestant-leaning, and her upbringing was modest compared to some European courts. She did not learn to sing or dance, nor was she trained in complex court etiquette. Instead, she was taught how to run a household, manage estates, and work dutifully as a noblewoman. This background later became important because it shaped her calm and practical personality and set her apart from the dramatic, finely educated ladies of Henry VIII's court. Henry VIII, by the late 1530s, was in a difficult position. He had broken from the Catholic Church, dissolved monasteries, and made England independent from the Pope, and this left him politically isolated, and he looked to form alliances with Protestant German princes. Thomas Cromwell, Henry VIII's chief minister, believed that a marriage with Anne of Cleves would strengthen England's position on the European stage. Henry agreed to consider the match, and the famous court painter Hans Holbein was sent to paint Anne's likeness. Holbein's portrait showed Anne as a modest, dignified and attractive, in a reserved way, girl. Henry approved the match based on the portrait alone, and negotiations continued. However, when Anne arrived in England in late 1539, Henry was deeply disappointed. He claimed she did not resemble her portrait and described her as nothing so fair as hath been reported. Whether this was due to actual differences or simply Henry's changing taste is still debated. Anne was not ugly. Several contemporary observers described her as tall, healthy and pleasant-looking. This difficulty was that she did not behave in the flirtatious or courtly way that Henry had preferred. She followed German customs, remaining formal and quiet, which Henry misinterpreted as dullness. Henry went through with the wedding on the 6th of January 1540, though he was reluctant. From the beginning, the marriage was stained, and Henry claimed that he could not consummate the marriage, saying he found Anne unattractive. He blamed her figure and her clothing, and later told his courtiers that he liked her not. Anne, unfamiliar with English customs and the expectations of a wife in Henry's court, did not know how to engage him or change his mind. Meanwhile, Thomas Cromwell, who had engineered the marriage, began to fall from Henry's favour. The unsuccessful union gave Henry a reason to move against him, and by the summer of 1540, Henry decided he wanted the marriage ended. Conveniently, Anne had no interest in resisting. She understood the dangers of opposing the king, especially after witnessing the previous fates of his wives. When Henry's counsellors began to ask whether she would agree to have the marriage annulled, she cooperated. The marriage was officially annulled in the July of 1540. The grounds were that Henry had not consummated the marriage and that Anne had previously been contracted to another nobleman. Anne accepted the annulment gracefully. Her wise decisions saved her life. Henry rewarded her for her compliance with generous financial settlements, including Richmond Palace and Hever Castle, the childhood home of Anne Boleyn. From this point onwards, Anne lived comfortably as an independent noblewoman in England. Henry referred to her as his beloved sister, a status that placed her above almost every other woman in the kingdom except his daughters, Mary and Elizabeth. She maintained good relationships with Henry and his children, and was often invited to court for Christmas and major celebrations. In many ways, she enjoyed more freedom than any of Henry's other wives. She did not have to please the king, or produce an heir, or compete for attention. She simply lived a peaceful life among her estate. Anne witnessed the fall of Thomas Cromwell, executed just days after her marriage was annulled. She also lived through Henry's marriage to Catherine Howard, who was executed for adultery, and then Catherine Parr, who outlived him. Through all this, Anne avoided political entanglements and stayed out of court intrigue. If her marriage had been a failure, her later life was quite a success. After Henry VIII died in 1547, Anne remained in England. She maintained her friendship with Princess Mary, who later became Mary I. And when Mary became Queen in 1553, Anne participated in her coronation and was given a place of honour. However, during Mary's Catholic reign, Anne's position weakened slightly. As a German Protestant, she no longer fit neatly into the new religious environment, and her visits to court became less frequent. Still, she was never persecuted, and she continued to live comfortably. Anne of Cleves died on the 16th of July 1557 at the age of 42. She had been suffering from a long illness, possibly cancer. Immediately after her death, her body was embalmed, and with this process her internal organs were cut from her body and removed. This was traditional for the bodies of royals and high-ranking people in Tudor society. The physicians would have made a large cut into her chest and then removed the heart, liver, lungs and other internal organs such as the intestines. This created a cavity, and it was then washed and filled with spices and sweet-smelling things. Then the body would be washed again and wrapped in a thick, heavy wax-dipped cloth known as a cerecloth. This cerecloth was a shroud and acted as a protective layer to the remains in order to keep away decay and rot. These cloths have been known to have been so effective that the bodies of kings buried 500 years ago are in remarkable states of preservation, and they look as fresh as the day they died. The funeral of Anne of Cleves was rather large. There was a huge procession. Her coffin, which was lead-lined and had an outer wooden shell, was processed to Westminster Abbey, and it was then left in the abbey for the evening. When the time for her burial came, she was interred on the south side of the high altar, in a low stone structure and tomb. On 3 sides of the tomb show the carvings and initials AC with a crown, a lion's head and skulls and crossed bones on. The back part of the tomb was covered by the later monuments. Now for centuries this burial was rather mysterious, but then in 1970s the words Anne of Cleves, Queen of England, born 1515, died 1557 were added. Her tomb looks like an altar. However, it is not recorded that this burial vault and tomb has ever been opened. She was placed inside the centre of the tomb, and because it hasn't been opened, we must consider that her remains may actually be perfectly preserved. There's no record of her body being disturbed either, so the combination of the cerecloth and the lead lining may have protected her body well. What is also interesting is that the tomb is very small and modest, and would only have enough space as to inter one coffin and one person, but most importantly, Anne was buried very closely to the shrine of Edward the Confessor, a key spot inside of the abbey, in the most holy part of the abbey. Now her tomb has actually been used in the coronations of most monarchs, and it sits close to where the coronation chair is placed. As her coffin and tomb have not been opened for almost 500 years, it is unlikely that it will ever be, meaning that we'll never know truly what state of decay the 4th wife of King Henry VIII's remains are in, and she may in fact be perfectly preserved, which is strange to think. Thank you for watching, and to support our channel please make sure to subscribe, and once again thank you so much for watching.